Guys, Texas and Oklahoma are not the only headliners when it comes to the Big 12. TCU is not the only headliner when it comes to the Big 12 this season. We've got 4 newcomers as well. And this is kind of the part of the preview where we want to talk through some of those newcomers. We'll get to the rest of the legacies here in a minute. But we didn't want to just push the newcomers down to the bottom of the preview because there's such an interesting story here for the Big 12 as it's in this period of transition. Texas and Oklahoma are on the way out. They're onboarding UCF, Cincinnati, Houston, and BYU. And I think as we kind of talk about all 4 of these teams, we agree that UCF is probably the most interesting. There's a chance that Cincinnati, if their offense is average, could have a winning record. There's a chance that if BYU can stop anybody, that they could be really solid with Kedon Slovis, right? Houston, same deal. If their defense can do anything, if they can get really good production on Donovan Smith, maybe they have a chance at a winning record. But I'll turn this to you guys. Out of those 4 teams, which one do you see being the most plucky and having the highest ceiling in 2023?
It's weird because I think those might be 2 different questions. I think UCF is going to be the most plucky. I love the offense. I love the leadership of Gus Malzahn. I love that John Reese Plumlee has played in a major conference and he's been entrenched as a starter for a long time. And I love that he's tailor-made for Gus Malzahn's offense. I think that that's going to give a lot of teams on their schedule that have never seen that offense before a lot of problems this year. Like they have a couple of opportunities early on in that conference schedule at Kansas State, hosting Baylor. I think that's a big opportunity to make a statement for UCF. Yeah. Going to Oklahoma, having, road games towards the end against Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Houston at home. They have a lot of statement opportunities. Highest ceiling, and this might be a little biased throwing because shout out to the Transfer Portal CFB magazine. I wrote the preview for BYU. If Kedon Slovis can come in and be more like the USC Kedon Slovis and less like the Pitt Kedon Slovis, then I think BYU has a very high ceiling. I think the offense has a lot of fun weapons. They've got in a transfer running back from UNLV that ran for 1,000 yards. The defense has struggled to stop a nosebleed for the last couple of years, but Kalani Sitake, he canned one of his closest friends that had been the DC for him for the entire time that he'd been head coach of BYU. And Kalani Sitake, a defensive guy, finally said enough is enough. We got to get this fixed. And he hires Weber State's head coach, Jay Hill, who had run some fantastic defenses at the FCS level at Weber State and really caused a lot of problems to some of the bigger powers in that conference. I like BYU's schedule. I think it's tricky in the middle and tricky at the very end with Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, but I think there's a lot of nice runways for them to get some chemistry. I think the Arkansas game is tricky, but what if Kedon Slovis balls out and KJ Jefferson has an off day at the end of September, right? That's not out of the question. They've got to find somebody to throw the football to. That they're losing a lot of production in Puka Nacua and Gunnar Romney. Those are 2 great weapons that are leaving the BYU program. They've got to find someone to step up at receiver. They've got to figure out how they're going to cover guys on defense. I like that they're bringing new blood in, but I could see them having a very high ceiling this year.
Yeah, I think for me, the highest ceiling and really the biggest team to look for here is UCF. You were talking about them just a second ago. I don't think we really expect too much out of Houston or Cincinnati. A lot of speculation on, well, what if and kind of and sort of, and it's nice. And look, don't get me wrong. I love Dana Holgorsen as much as the next guy, but I'm not a Houston believer this year.
That love is dwindling. I will say the next guy might not love Dana Holgorsen all that much, Garrett.
Yeah, well, maybe not. But, I think I look at this and I say, if we're looking at UCF and thinking about what they could do, yeah, you're right. They have a lot of spots where they could trip somebody up. It's a bad day to be a Bear on September 30th at the Bounce House. That's going to be their conference opener. It's going to be the first chance for their fans to really be at a Big 12 home game and get to do that. So it's a bad day to be a Bear. I think Baylor probably escapes that game anyways, but it's closer to a coin toss than probably most people in Waco would want it to be. Gus Malzahn, for what you want to say, he's a really good coach, and he's got that championship pedigree. That's not something that very many, if any, I'm having to kind of think, but I don't think anyone else in the Big 12 can say that as a head coach yet, that they have championship pedigree. So, look, it's something when they're coming into it. And if you got a guy like John Reese Plumlee who can really play well, and I think that he's enough of a difference maker at quarterback that he can get a bad team, or even just a decent team on a bad day, he could get one of those teams and maybe make a little bit of noise. I do have them going 7-5, so I think they will hit their over. But I don't think they're going to be necessarily great this year, but I do think that they'll make some noise and maybe establish themselves going forward in the Big 12 now that we're going to be losing Texas and Oklahoma.
For UCF, the other thing to mention, they have a fascinating start to the season in non-conference play. They host Kent State, then they go to Boise State. Now, we haven't gotten to the group of 5, but Boise State will likely be the favorite to win the Mountain West Conference. And I don't really see how UCF travels the second week of the season to the blue turf and wins that game. So I think they're already going to come out of non-conference play with at least one blemish. But yeah, then that sunflower sandwich with Baylor in the middle. They've got Kansas State, Baylor, and then Kansas, a bye week before Oklahoma. And then the rest of the schedule gets kind of manageable. It's going to be an offensive shootout to end the season, hosting Oklahoma State, going to Lubbock, and then hosting Houston. I mean, boy, you talk about taking the over on some of the point spreads. I think smashing the over November 11th through the 25th is probably sound financial advice if you're betting UCF football. I'll take us over to Cincinnati because you guys are a little bit lower on Cincinnati, and I can understand that, right? 9-4 a season ago. Scott Satterfield is now the head coach after Luke Fickell goes north to Wisconsin. The offense is not going to impress a lot of people, at least on paper, right? Emory Jones, who's on his third stop, is now likely going to win that job. That quarterback battle coming over from Arizona State. They do have some really interesting wide receivers. And if you listen to our interview with the TNT College Football Podcast, Bobby Wilson, who's a UConn insider, who I was having a fascinating conversation with today, I'll just say this. If you see UConn rumors on your timeline, I think you can buy stock in that. That's all I'll say for right now. I'm not going to break any news here, but the rumors are likely to be true. Aaron Turner was a guy that we talked about coming over from UConn. He was their leading wide receiver a season ago. He's now at Cincinnati. They've got D. Wiggins coming over from Louisville. They've got Donovan Ollie coming over from Wazoo. It's going to be a lot of fun, I think, chess pieces to move around the Cincinnati board. Now, their offensive line could be a complete disaster. They only have one returning starter at center, and they've got to learn an entirely new blocking scheme. So, Emory Jones hasn't exactly been a difference maker in his career. Now they've got a new offensive line. They've got transfer wide receivers coming in. Like, where's the stability? Well, the stability might be on the defensive side of the ball. I just want to shout out Dante, the Godfather Corleone, who was the highest graded defensive player in the country last year as a true freshman per Pro Football Focus. So shout out the Godfather. Daniel Grizak comes over from Utah State to play linebacker as well. Had a very, very productive season there. So Cincinnati is going to be interesting because as you pull up their schedule, I can get them to 5-7. I think their ceiling might be 7 wins if they can pull off a couple of upsets, but that game against Pitt in week 2 is going to be fascinating. That Miami, Ohio game is not an automatic win. The Redhawks should actually be kind of decent this year. They don't have just a terrifying conference schedule in the Big 12. Like, Cincinnati actually has a very workable schedule. They'll probably lose to Oklahoma in their Big 12 opener, but then they go on the road to Brigham Young. They host Iowa State and Baylor in back-to-back weeks. We'll see what Oklahoma State does. We'll talk about them in a minute. But then, the rest of the weeks, it's like, yeah, you could see Cincinnati with a decent offense winning a couple of those games and getting to bowl eligibility. So I'm not going to necessarily convince you, hey, take the over on Cincinnati's 5.5. I think that is an awesome line. I have them just missing it at 5-7. When I look at their schedule and say, realistically, here's what they're going to do, I have them at the under. That being said, though, they are one of those teams that I think on a given week in the Big 12, you're not thrilled if you're having to go north to Cincinnati and play the Bearcats. I mean, how far off from that take are you guys?
I don't hate it, and I love that they avoid the big three in Texas, right? They don't play Texas, Tech, or TCU at all this year, and I think that's huge if you're trying to find a way to a bowl game this year. I just don't know that I trust Scott Satterfield. Like I don't know that anyone in the ACC. I know Garrett doesn't like Scott Satterfield.
I was going to say, where did he coach last year? I don't know if I trust this Scott guy.
Yeah, the 31-7 against Syracuse on opening week last year was not a good way to endear Garrett's heart to him. But
I don't want to talk about it, okay?
I just don't know that I'm ready to get on his bandwagon yet. I think if you're looking at Louisville, their fans seem to be more excited that he left than that they had to find a replacement for him. Yeah. And I don't know. Like I'm just kind of in wait and see mode at best on Scott Satterfield and seeing what he can do with that offense and retooling it. But I don't think the take is far off. I think they definitely have the schedule where they can maybe muscle their way to a bowl game.
Yeah, I've got them at 4-8 personally. I don't think they're going to be very good. Lost a whole lot, obviously, with the coaching staff walking out the door. Yeah, I don't like Scott Satterfield too much. I don't think he's going to be all that great. He could be good. He could just, turn it on at Cincinnati. Maybe, the bright lights of Louisville were a little too bright for him, and now at Cincinnati something changes. That's totally pulling something out of my butt because I have no idea why that would be the case. But it's speculation, I think, at this point, if Satterfield is actually going to do well at Cincinnati. I think maybe there's a path there, but if you're looking at the teams that are currently the newcomers, I don't know that Cincinnati is not maybe – I would say they're probably fourth in terms of, I would say, long-term upside, just in terms of the fact that you've got, Houston, they're in the state of Texas footprint. They're right there in a great recruiting spot. BYU, I think they've got more reasons to believe in them long-term. UCF for sure has more reasons to believe in them long-term. I don't know why I believe in Cincinnati long-term as a new member of the conference. It could be a little bit of rough sledding these first couple of years in the conference for them.
That's a fascinating thing to break down maybe on another show. I think that would be
for sure
fascinating. What do we think about Houston, though? Because recency bias for me personally, I rewatched the Texas game from last year. And Donovan Smith started that game. And if you don't know, Donovan Smith is now the starting quarterback for Dana Holgerson's Fighting Cougars. And that pairing could be fun. What do we think about the Cougars this year?
I think Houston's offense is going to score a lot of points. I think they have the big play potential. That's for sure. Now, they lost some guys to the transfer portal. Alton McCaskill, their leading rusher, goes to Colorado. Kind of, did not have some great things to say about Houston. Some other transfers kind of seconded that. So Dana Holgerson's, I think, a little bit on the hot seat right now. I think the team underperformed last year greatly. We were talking about Houston having a chance to go 12-0 last year. They went 8-5 and 5-3 in the American, right?
Yeah. Oops.
That astronomical loss to SMU where it was like 90 to 88. It felt like just scoring every other possession. Houston had no defense. And guys, I don't think Houston has a ton of defense this year. They have some intriguing edge players. They didn't have a lot of pass rush last year. David Ugwegbu comes over from Oklahoma, had 208 tackles while he was a Sooner, 16 tackles for losses. They've got Nelson Caesar Jr. For me on defense, they've got to start getting pressure on the quarterback. The offense is going to be a lot of fun, though. Donovan Smith at quarterback, their wide receiver core should be fun. Josh Cobbs transfers in from Wyoming. Stephen Johnson transfers in from Oklahoma State. Matthew Golden was their second best receiver a season ago behind Tank Dell. The problem for me is their schedule. Houston's schedule could get off to a really bumpy start. They play
the anti-Cincinnati schedule.
Oh, dude, they host UTSA in week 1. That's a loss. They host TCU in week 3. That's a loss. They go to Tech in week 5. I think that's a loss. So,
yep.
Kind of glass half full. You're 2-3 to start the year before an early bye.
Rice is plucky too, man. Rice could be fun this year too.
They could. There's a lot of momentum behind Rice trying to make a bowl game this year, which, spoiler alert, I don't have Houston getting to a bowl game. Then you play Texas, Kansas State, Baylor, Cincinnati, Oklahoma State, UCF. to finish. The issue that I'm having is outside of Baylor and Cincinnati, all of those teams can score a lot of points. And I don't know that your defense down in Houston is going to be able to stop teams that can score a lot of points. So for me, I have a very disappointing 4-8, 2-7 conference record. I don't know if Dana Holgerson survives that, certainly considering kind of some of the negative headlines that they had about that program. I mean, you had former Cougars saying, yeah, nobody wants to go down with the ship here, and that's why they transferred out. So I think it's a very inauspicious start to the Big 12 regime for Dana Holgerson and the Houston Cougars.
Yeah, I feel like Holgerson's going to have a little bit of rope just because it is the Big 12 and it's their first year. So maybe he gets a little extra leash to, okay, we'll give you one more year, figure it out, be more competitive type of thing. But yeah, guys, you're right. That schedule is brutal. That's just whoever was making the schedule did them zero favors whatsoever. It's going to be a rough year for them. I also have them at 4-8. I don't see a lot of wins on the schedule. They play just about all of the good teams. And they don't miss very many, or they don't play very many of the bad teams.
It kind of feels like when they were making these schedules with the newcomers, they were like, oh shoot, like Houston's got to play. Who's Houston playing? Well, they're going to play Texas Tech on the road. Oh shoot, they've got to. I guess they'll host Texas. We'll throw them a bone. They'll play them at home. Crap, they got to go to the Little Apple. Oh shoot, like they got to send them to the bounce house. Like just the hits keep coming. It's like an 80s track. Like just roll one right after the other. And I don't see a lot of wins on this schedule.
I just don't. And I think they were trying to do them a favor by letting them kind of get into the conference and like play some of the teams and not just be like, hey, we're going to make the new guys play each other. And I guess you could play like Iowa State or something. And they wanted them to be able to get like fully, I guess, baptized into the Big 12. And
Houston has all those historic rivalries too. Right. They're playing like pretty much their entire old Southwest Conference schedule this year.
Right. Which is nice for them. And I mean, maybe not so much in terms of results, but it's nice that they get some of those games back.
They'll get some sellouts at their stadium.
They'll definitely sell some tickets. But yeah, I don't know. I don't see a whole lot of wins on the schedule. I see if they are getting baptized in the Big 12, they're getting dunked for sure, and then they'll be drenched by the end of it. So I feel bad for them, but maybe long term they'll be okay. I think they have better projections forward than Cincinnati does, but
their pastor decided to start the prayer while they're still being held underwater. Yeah. Like they're gonna there's some bubbles like coming up to the surface.
Gracious him! How about that?